Has it been that long already? Boy, I sure hope one of the games I love is still active. Ah, shit. Well, I got a few episodes before we talk about that one anyways, so at the rate I'm making these videos, I should be releasing that one in about 2 years, so stay tuned. For now, we gotta talk about this one, and I have a fuckload to say about this. A bit of background, I stumbled on this game one day when I was reminiscing on Friday the 13th, 2017 with a friend of mine. We were talking about games similar to it and the different games that came before it, and I suddenly remembered seeing this one when I was about 11 or 12, looking for anything kind of based on Friday the 13th. Now, you might assume, based on how much I shit on these games and how much I talk about how trash these movies are, that I hate them, which is not the case. I recognize they're mostly hot garbage, and I love them. They were the first slasher movies I ever watched, and as a kid even more so. Back then, I was just looking for my fix of Friday the 13th in any avenue I could get it, whether it was fan films back in the early YouTube days or found games, which I did find a few of. As I mentioned in a previous video, I learned emulation just to play the NES games because I was so desperate for a fix, and that's when I discovered this game. A fan game made by Havoc Games. More on that later, it's going to be a big chunk of the video. I downloaded this back in the day and hardly remembered much about it because I was using the family computer at the time, and it was not meant for gaming, nor was I able to download anything other than Roblox without my PC becoming a claymore. So I settled for just watching gameplay in the 4 seconds of time it actually worked before it crashed my old PC. Circling back to a few months ago, I decided to show it to a friend after remembering it existed. And everything about this game was so perplexing to me, it actually inspired this whole series. I had to know more about this game, and I fell down this crazy rabbit hole and came up with way more questions than I ever got answers, but I think I kind of figured out, for the most part, what happened here. And so now that the Yap Fest is over, let's finally talk about the game. Friday the 13th 3D is a fan game that, quote, released in 2011. I use quotes because I couldn't really confirm if this was supposed to be a final product or a demo. Now, keep in mind, this game, to the best of my knowledge, was made by just one guy. Again, more on that later. Credit where credit is due, making games is difficult. I definitely couldn't do it, especially back when he made it. I was very young and stupid. However, this doesn't automatically make this game good. Far from it. While I can appreciate the effort this guy put in, I can also recognize a bad game when I play one. This game is entertainingly bad. Every single level of this game dances that line between janky as all hell and completely unplayable, and then walks right over it. It plays like I'm gliding rather than walking. Hit detection seems to be non-existent. I don't even know if I'm aiming at the NPCs more often than not. Around every corner is some sort of game-breaking glitch. However, I can't say I didn't have fun while playing. Back then, not many games existed in this capacity. It's evident this was a passion project and was made with the intention of satisfying our need for a proper game based on Friday the 13th for at least a little while until news of an official game started making waves. With that being said, this game looks just awful. The main menu looks like it was made in MS Paint for an intro to graphic design class as the first project. All the character models are Jason adjacent. What a fucking shit-ass game. What the fuck is this?
Dude, what the fuck is that, bro? That ain't Jason, bro. That's fucking Mason. Thursday the 12th, head ass. Shut the fuck up. Fucking dumbass looking bitch.
And the NPCs are as forgettable as possible. The levels seem to be entirely made out of PNGs. The buildings and other objects look fine. If they're stock assets, they definitely look like it, but if they were made from scratch, I'd say they're pretty well made. The few interiors you can enter are completely bland, and to jump ahead a bit, I do like this diner interior, mostly because it's the only one where it looks like a lot of effort went into putting it together. Apart from that, everything else just looks like a flat neck spot texture. I also encountered this seizure-inducing lighting glitch immediately as I started the game, as well as this one bench that's just inexplicably lit up despite no obvious light source. Surprisingly, the lighting looks fine in every other level. Somehow it got completely messed up in only the first level. If nothing else, it sets up the tone for the rest of the game perfectly. Each level follows the same loop over and over with little deviation. There's usually about 2 campers for you to kill on each level, and you cannot progress until you do so. It's not really hard to find anyone. The first one's almost always just wandering aimlessly out in the open, always with the look of the lights are on but nobody's home look on their face. They're never even scared of you. Even if you get in their way, they just keep going about their day until you hit them. After you hit them, they start running around frantically and looping the same 2 screams over and over until you put them out of their misery. They make no effort to hide from you, but they more than make up for it by the speed boost they get from their fear. As I mentioned before, aiming is non-existent, so when they start running, it's anyone's guess if your swing lands or not with the earlier weapons. Once you start finding the other weapons in later levels, it's not an issue at all, it only gets easier. The weapon variety is alright. Obviously, the stronger ones you find, the easier it is to kill someone, but at a certain point it doesn't really seem to matter because they start dealing the same amount of damage. I may have misread this somewhere, but I believe there was supposed to be limb dismemberment. It's entirely possible it's not in the game, but just as equally possible that it just doesn't work at all. Much like the old games of yore, we start in another shit-ass graveyard, but for once we aren't dealing with zombies. If this developer learned anything from the previous games, it's that zombies are the fucking worst enemy for Mason to fight. My expectation for games like this is that I get to murder horny camp counselors, not fight other killing machines with exactly 0 amount of horniness. Not much else is here besides a small mausoleum and headstones that stop you dead in their tracks because they're barely visible. The next level takes you to this house next to the world's deepest pond, as well as an on-fire car with 2 dead bodies next to it. Pure circumstances out here doing my job for me. It was right around here that I realized Mason has about 2 animations total. I hopped into the pond, discovered he doesn't even have a swimming animation, not even one that indicates he's moving. Same with crouching, his legs just clip into the ground. Again, I'm not a developer and I understand that it's difficult to make games, especially alone, but it cannot be hard to just make a simple crouching pose. There doesn't even need to be an in-between animation, just a cut from one pose to the next would suffice. Though, I will concede on this being way more hilarious. After finishing the previous level, we are greeted by the jankiest police responding to our victims, and again, they're not scared of you or even really seem to suspect that you did it. No idea who called or how, but here we are, and they don't do anything till you hit them. So, good job, cops. We then discover not only are we killing teens, but we're also fighting against abusive men. Or at least that's what this helpful loading screen tells us at the start of the level. You don't really witness any evidence of this, it's just kind of implied. We may not be perfect, but at least we don't hit women. Mason kills men and women equally. Not because we're horrible low-life men, but because my mom said so. Once we save the woman from her evil, rotten, no-good husband, Mason kills her and moves on to the next area. After our virtuous journey, we approached a diner. As I said before, this is the best area we can enter. Though that's not really saying much. All that's here is a diner and a few cars. The diner's modeled pretty decently compared to the rest of the game, so make of that what you will. Though I think the PS1 would reject this game for looking too outdated overall. Another one of our victims makes an attempt to fight back, but manages to get himself stuck on the bar stool like a dipshit, and once again we kill him and go about our day. Immediately we follow that up with what I will dub the worst level. Though keep in mind, every level seems to be fighting for last place. If I had to pick one, it would be this. It feels like it just takes place in a canyon even though it's supposed to be surrounded by trees, and we just have this random jerk-off camping in the middle of the woods. The tent serves no purpose because he's just chilling, not even his fire, he's just fucking around by this ditch, so let's move on to the next one. Finally, we end the game where we should have started this entire time. Camp Blood itself, looking entirely nothing like itself. By far, this is the biggest area we can explore. It's got a big lake with a sunken ship in the middle, multiple cabins, 3 of which are labeled Boys Cabin 1, because they just couldn't decide which one was special enough, and the main counselors hate organization. Hidden in the corner of the map, you can find Mason's Goon Cave with his rotten fleshlight. Just a basic box with some decent looking textures, but it's a nice touch. This time we have to kill 4 people scattered across the map, though for some reason it claimed I was finished with the level despite having only killed 3 of them. The ending credits speak briefly about the journey of this game, while also sending me a lovely message for shitting all over it. Before I continue to tear this game apart, I did want to mention some extra features that I didn't really know how to fit anywhere else in the review, so here's a section I'm going to call Pretty Neat Features in This Otherwise Shit-Ass Game. It has different skins for Mason that are scattered around the levels, and you find them as collectibles. There's little references to the movies in each of the levels, like this sunken ship, the diner, the graveyard, and probably more, but I didn't really know which ones would be which. It's a nice touch that Jason gets covered in more and more blood as he beats the piss out of everybody. While I criticized it before, I do like that there's a weapon variety and it makes for a different gameplay loop, if only slightly. And yeah, those are all I could think of. Now for the next section, a whole bunch of stupid shit. I got stuck in multiple doors because they shut while I was in the doorway and I couldn't get out. A fix exists in the game's README file, but there shouldn't be a fix, it should just push me out of the way. In most buildings, the entire house model would completely disappear every single time I looked at the floor. These cops, like what the fuck is even happening here? Gunfire sounds played, and these windows shatter despite nobody shooting at me on the diner level. There's no cops, and the one guy with a weapon doesn't even have a gun. I found a way to break the game on the tent level by climbing up the hill and walking through this gap in the trees. I unlocked extra weapons early by doing this, and discovered that there are no borders and I could just walk off the map and get stuck. It's pretty easy not to get stuck, but I figured I'd do it just for fun. But you can also just clip through the ground at spawn and then just finish the level as normal. Anything involving water. This just speaks for itself. Pam can't hold weapons at all. They just float around her. It's pretty funny to watch though. Both of these doors open no matter which one you click. Starting a new game immediately after finishing one playthrough causes the game to get stuck at this camera angle. Loading an old save causes the game to crash, making the entire save feature totally worthless. Now, I wanted to move on to something a bit more interesting, which is the rabbit hole I went down trying to look for any information about this game. All I knew was the company's name, which is either Havoc Games or Havoc Productions, depending on what you read. They list a website in the credits, so I went to the domain and there was nothing. I checked the Wayback Machine for that exact website just to see if it was archived in any capacity, and came up with either GoDaddy landing pages or a blank white screen. Amusingly though, I found a site that claimed it was the wealth of information despite having no information. I googled Havoc Games and found an old Minecraft server. Not quite it. I searched Friday the 13th with Havoc Games and discovered a message board about the game itself. This message board didn't have too much to go off of, but it had been posted on as early as 2024 by a user just called Jason Voorhees. I attempted to message this person to gain more insight about the game, but haven't heard back. He seems to check the site about once a year at most, so if he does decide to get back to me, this video may require an update later down the line. I also found a website that has news on everything Friday the 13th related, with multiple articles chronicling the development of this game. There wasn't too much to go off of, but I did discover an email address in one of the articles that was there to message the developer with any questions. Now, this might not be the best research strategy, but I chose not to send one out because on one of the message boards, I read that his email is completely inactive and doesn't really respond to anybody. I can't remember where exactly I read this, so it may have been the wrong call not to. But shortly after, I did discover a site called HavocGames.net, which proved to be my best lead. While the website itself doesn't exist anymore, it did at one point and thankfully got archived to some extent. Most of the pictures didn't survive, however a lot of the website and its meta iterations did. And I was able to discover a few good details. Now sit tight because this is quite a lot. For starters, the developer was a man named Matt with one T. According to him, it's because his parents smoked pot when choosing his name, or at least he likes to think so. This is all information found on an archived version of his site from 2003, And keep in mind, a lot of this might be a joke, but it also might not be, and I'm pretty sure it was written by a teenager, so just bear with me here. He doesn't give his full name for privacy reasons, but he does shed some light on how his website got started and why he makes games. As it turns out, he wasn't a fan of games initially at all, nor was he a fan of gay people. He considers himself somewhat of a homophobe. Also, these misspellings, they're in every single sentence, so keep that in mind if you ever read this for yourself. He doesn't hate F words, just rather he didn't associate with them, because the ones he met want to turn everyone gay and he doesn't want to change anyone. So don't dislike him because he doesn't like F words. And then he just moves on like that wasn't anything. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever read in my life. Again, as I mentioned before, I'm not sure how real or how much of a joke all of this is supposed to be, so just based on how it's written, I'm also gonna just leave it at that. I'm not gonna touch that anymore. Most of what he says can really easily seem like a joke or might just be his attempt to seem edgy, so, you know, take all this with a grain of salt. There's some stuff that seems to be in some truth, so let's just keep reading. After a short rant about that, he explains how he wasn't a fan of horror movies or video games, but did enjoy working with computers and discovered he liked game design, so somehow he came around to enjoying both of these things and put them together, made horror games of his own. He doesn't really explain his rationale on how any of that came to be, but, you know, who cares? Eventually, he started becoming a bit of a troublemaker and claims he did time in juvie. He also says no one touches him or his ass on the threat of blinding them. And after this, he just elaborates more on the website, which is crazy, saying that he wasn't a fan of how it looked, so he shut it down, and then lost his first game, of which I'm pretty sure there are 3, called Street Life. And after his PC crashed, he lost it all. His first Friday the 13th game was a 2D game he had made around this time, and he had another website get shut down before starting work on multiple Friday the 13th games. Eventually, he had made the final website with the help of his friend Ken, who created Unleaded Games. Admittedly, I didn't get too deep into researching him, because there was somehow less information on this guy that I could find, and the only play he seemed to have in this particular tale was helping make the website and eventually collaborating on another Friday the 13th game, but we'll get to that one later. As mentioned before, this wasn't the first Friday the 13th game he ever made, and I don't even think it's the first version of this particular game. I believe one of the original games he made was called Jason's Revenge, or Jason's Revenge Director's Cut. That's the only one I could seem to find much on, and it was released around 2003. Here is the main website for that game.
He is the creator and sustainer of all the worlds, whether those worlds are known or unknown to mankind.
I wasn't able to get a download for the game, and I probably wouldn't have played it anyways. I did manage to find a demo video for what he calls the Director's Cut.
Feeling so fake.
This is quite possibly the most early 2000s video I've ever come across, and my life is much better for it. There was also a planned sequel called Jason's Revenge 2, but I couldn't find anything about that, just the mentioned footage before of the director's cut. From here, the information gets a bit more sparse. Mostly what we have to go on is articles from the Friday the 13th franchise website. Somewhere down the line, Ken and Matt started collaborating on a more definitive title for them. And from this, I can assume that the game I played was either an early build Matt was comfortable enough releasing, with the eventual plan to make a more polished follow-up. This is all speculation, as I can't find much information about this one specifically, apart from the fact that it exists and was downloadable on his website. Eventually, he stopped responding to people at all, and no one could get in touch with him or Ken to ask about updates on their newest project. He even shut down his website. All we were left with was this game, downloads of it are pretty easy to come by. Just be careful because the websites aren't exactly known for their lack of malware. And if anybody has more information on this game, please feel free to drop it in the comments. And if I'm wrong about any of this speculation or even the actual things I found, please provide more context. I would love that. As much as I kind of ripped this game apart, I do actually appreciate it for what it is. A nice way to just wail on counselors as Jason, and as far as I'm aware, not many games existed like that for Friday the 13th specifically. And as a kid, I know I would have loved this if I could have get it to work. Yeah, it's a buggy mess, and at times it's unplayable, but I wouldn't say it's not worth playing. I think the release of the most recent game in 2017 kind of made it easy to dismiss this as trash, since we basically have the same thing, but it's, I guess depending on who you ask, a lot more polished, but it's an official game that kind of gave us exactly what we wanted, even with the eventual shutdowns, but that's a video for another day. However, back in 2011, we didn't have this. We didn't even have Dead by Daylight, and this was about what we wanted, and it was all we could have for the moment. And I respect that. I really do, in spite of all the bugs that it has. And it was made by just one guy who, above all else, like, really just wanted to see a game like this come to fruition, and I can't blame him for that. I can shit on his game because, you know, it's pretty easy to do so, but I can't, like, say he wasn't making something special. I can judge his really weird website and why he'd put that on the internet, but I guess 2003 was a different time, and I was not old enough to be using the internet to really do the same thing. Who knows? Maybe I would have done that, but I could still respect what he did, not what he used to say, and that's all I'll say on that. Thanks for watching this video. It was a bit different this week, but I felt this story was a lot more interesting than just a review of the game itself, and I wanted to change it up a bit from the usual format. I know this was just a fan game and not anything official, but there's not a whole lot of official games, and I think this one specifically is pretty important. This one kind of made waves back in the day, and it deserved to be talked about, especially after I found out what the full story was, or at least parts of it. The next review will also be a fan game, just a bit of a spoiler for that one. It'll change the format again. I do like making these longer videos with deeper stories than just the game review. These fan games are important because for a while this was really all we had to get the games we wanted. For like 20 years or so there was not even an official Friday the 13th game released, so I want to talk about at least a couple of these before finishing off with the 2017 game. But yeah, like I said, next review will be a change of format as well, and until then I'll see you next time.